All right, so let's keep going on this journey. We're almost there. So this lecture is going to hit on the reptiles and the birds, which are a lot more closely related than you actually might think. So hopefully you'll appreciate that after today. So a reminder where we're at. So we are talking about right here. So we talked about all our fishes in the last group, and then we introduced the amphibia. So we started to see where we started limbs form, which is very unique to an amphibians, the frogs and your salamanders. So that was the introduction of what we call our tetrapods. And then now what we're going to see is we're going to have keep the organisms with 4 legs, but we're going to start to see what happens with the eggs. That's going to be a little bit more different between each of those. So we're going to talk about this big group right here, Reptilia right here. So how do we get right here? So we're talking about the amniotes, and this is where we classify a big group. So these are going to be both include your reptiles, your birds, and your mammals. Now with these, they have adapted this shelled egg, and what it does is it protects the embryo by an amniotic membrane. Now what's really important at this is it kind of takes away our dependence on water environment for development. So we can colonize more of the land because we don't have to be as close to a water environment. Now it's still going to have a very moist environment for development because the inside of the egg is very wet. Now this is thanks due to the shell that helps retain water, but it also allows for a gas exchange. Now you're going to see some shells are going to be hard, especially when it comes to birds, but some shells are going to be super soft when it comes to the reptiles. Now, when it comes to mammals, we actually don't develop in shells. We don't have shelled eggs, but we have our embryo develop within an amnion. So let's talk about the amniotic egg a little bit. So what does it do? Well, it has several functions. There's going to be blood vessels located within the yolk sac, and that's going to help transport nutrients to the circulatory system of the embryo, which you have right here. Now you're also going to have what we call the chorion, which is right on the outside here. It's going to facilitate an exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the embryo and the egg's external environment. Now next up is the allantois, right here. And this is where we're going to store the nitrogenous waste produced by the embryo, and also helps facilitate with respiration because, you know, this is an organism. It does have to go and get rid of waste in some way, and that's where we're going to store it. And then finally, the amnion right there, it's going to help protect the embryo from mechanical shock and help support hydration. So this is just, you know, the basic anatomy of an egg right there and the different parts and that they function. So let's introduce the reptiles. Well, what makes them unique is they lay shelled eggs on land. So they're going to utilize sexual reproduction, and since we're more terrestrial, we're going to start to see more of these. Pretty much everyone from now on utilize internal fertilization. Now when you think about reptiles, just looking at these guys, you think of a scaly, waxy skin, and why we have that is to prevent water loss, and we constantly shed that throughout their lifetime. Think of that as a prime example is the snake. Now with this, we now have true lungs because we can't use our skin for respiration like the amphibians did because we're in these more harsh environments, so we have to use lungs. Now, when it comes to thinking about where a lot of these guys survive, they're going to excrete nitrogen as uric acid paste. And the reason they do this is to conserve body water, because sometimes a lot of these guys survive environments where water is very scarce. Now, another key term is these guys are ectotherms. So what that means is they have to get their body heat from the environment. They cannot regulate their temperature. When we start talking about body and homeostasis, we'll talk about endotherms versus ectotherms. But these guys, they have to have some form of heat in order to warm up their body. So if you have a pet reptile, you probably have that heat rock for them. Now there's 4 living clades, and we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail now. So first one is the clade Crocodilia, and I find that funny. They calls it small lizard. Now this is where you're going to find your alligators, your crocodiles, and your caiman. About 25 species within this group. Now they do thrive throughout the tropics and the subtropics of Africa, South America, southern Florida, Asia, and Australia. You can find them in both freshwater and saltwater habitats, and there's brackish habitats, which are pretty much those swampy areas which you do not want to be in. Now, what's unique about these guys, they do spend most of their time on water, and when you do see them on land, it takes a lot of energy out of them. So this is a video where I think it's cool. They pay a lot of money to actually go in this cage and like swim with big crocodiles, which I wouldn't do, but you know, I ask, would you do this? Which I find that kind of cool. So some people really love these guys. Now next is the clade spindle danita, which are the wedge tooth, which is only 2 species and they're both found in New Zealand, but you know, it's kind of unique about them. Now they do resemble lizards, but they are distinct and have some characteristics found in birds and turtles, so enough to where they get to be their own little group. Now, some qualities about them, they don't have an external ear at all, but they have a third partial eye in the middle of their forehead, which I couldn't find a good example of that. It's mostly seen in the very young animals, and by the time they become adults, that third eye is kind of covered up, which I found that kind of weird. Probably a lot of people fear this group too, this clade Comata. So when you think of Comata, think of scaly skin. About 9,200 species here, and these are your lizards and your snakes. Now, lizards might have 4 limbs and eyelids and external ears. Those are lacking in snakes. Snakes have no arms and legs. You know, that's the way they are. Wide range of sizes in this group, and they are found in every continent except Antarctica, which I find that quite interesting, and they vary. You can have carnivorous and some herbivores in this group too. Now, what's unique about snakes, they have that kinetic skull so they can swallow large prey, and like I've watched plenty of those nature shows to know that scares the crud out of me. The reason they do that is so it kind of unhinges their jaw so it won't harm the snake with that. Now, they kill their prey first to make it safer, and there's 2 different ways they can do that, via constriction, or they can use venom to help immobilize and aid in digestion. So these videos kind of talk about that a little bit more. One of them is actually where they take some snake venom and put it on some human blood and show how it coagulates and how that can be really dangerous. Really cool. And then the last little group of the reptiles, the testudines, are those that have a shell. So these are going to be your turtles, your terrapins, and your tortoises. I think of those little baby guys, they're kind of cute. They're going to have that bony or cartilaginous cell that develops from their ribs. So it is kind of part of their ribs connected to that shell. Only about 325 species, and a unique quality about these guys is none of them exhibit parental care. So you ever seen those documentaries where the females go and lay their eggs and then they just cover them up and she goes off and she has a bunch of young, and you just hope that they make it to the ocean and not get eaten by birds and stuff once they hatch, but you know, you kind of root for them, but then you know, once they make it into the ocean, only a few are going to survive because they're tasty snacks for everyone else. So I thought that was kind of interesting on them. And then finally, your birds. The book doesn't go too much into them, but here's a little bit of information about them. So a lot of data suggests that birds belong with the reptile clade. There's a lot of similarities between them. There's about 10,000 species. Now, with these guys, they're homeothermic. That means they maintain an elevated and constant body temp above average of most animals. Not everyone runs at 98.6. I know dogs run a little bit higher, but birds do like to run at the higher rate. Now, instead of scales, birds have feathers, which are just another way of saying modified scales. Now, there are the contour, which are your exterior, your streamlined ones, and then the down feathers, which are the insulation ones, which make your super soft pillows. Now, both these aid insulation and flight. Now, one unique thing about birds is they're going to have hollow bones, and the reason they have those is to allow for flight, you know, because you want to be as light as possible, so having those hollow bones really aids in that. One thing they also notice about birds is they have a fused skeleton and cranium, and this is going to help lighten overall weight. Weird things about birds, they only have 1 ovary. I thought that was kind of odd, and they don't have teeth, so this helps reduce bone mass. So they'll go through and they'll have what's called a crop, and most of the time in that crop, you know, they'll see like small rocks and stuff that kind of breaks things down. So here's a cool video about birds, which I highly advise you watch. And then also, as always, mostly fun and cool videos, and then credit for my slides.